Hi, how are you?
Hi, good evening. I'm good. How are you?
Very good, good evening. So, welcome today to our session. And I would
Thank you.
like to introduce Ammaar Chowdry from Chennai. His firm name is ED Plus Architecture. And he is with us to discuss our today's topic, which is blend of modern and vernacular fenestration system, collectively contributing to climate responsive architecture. Now, let me give you a small introduction about Ammar. He has a lot of accolades to his name, and some of the things I'll have to read it out for you. Why? Because they're a little difficult for me to kind of understand from an architectural point of view. So, he's done his bachelor's in architecture from Miyazi, if I'm pronouncing it correct,
That's right.
Academy of
That's right.
Architecture, and he was awarded for his thesis project titled The Utopian Grave, and very interestingly, that envisioned the built form as a catalyst of emotions. Now, that's something new for me to actually come across after so many sessions. So, we'll try to know more about it from Ammar. Then he's had a lot of experience with various renowned architectural firms across the globe. So one of them being MOAD, or how do you pronounce it, MOAD,
More.
and then
Yeah.
okay, then Selnikier Grabli Architects Paris, and also KSM Architecture, where he represented the firm at the World Architectural Festival at Berlin. Then he's also interacted with Pritzker laureate Seima Kazuyo of design firm Sana, as I understand SANAA, to work on the Inuima Art Island project, Japan. So that's pretty expansive experience that you have across the globe. And he's a strong believer in hedonistic sustainability and tries to break away from the general or the traditional sustainability that we talk about. So, welcome, Amar, to today's session, and a small introduction from your side and some more details about probably how do you treat your architecture.
Perfect. Hi, thank you for having me over in this session. So I'll talk about the firm rather because you've given me more of an introduction than I'm used to hearing
Yeah.
usually. Ed Plus architecture basically derives out of three components. So the E stands for environment, then we have design, and the plus basically stands for whoever and whatever it is that we're working with. So we kind of, yes, we are an architecture firm, but we kind of try to believe and look at ourselves as being more to that, where we feel that design doesn't just stop at architecture. Design can be on various materials, various aspects, design of materials, design in terms of who you're designing for, who you're designing with, and how you can collaborate with multiple agencies to come out with something different, and breaking away from the traditional textbook format of, how things can be done. So that's our firm, and we've we have different various typologies of projects. We have universities, we have a range of small scale residences to large scale, ranging from 4,000 to 50,000 square feet as well. And I think the biggest challenge and the exciting factor for us as a firm is how you kind of do something different, but along the lines of our beliefs and principles in a 4,000 square foot house and a 40,000 square foot house, and how it all kind of ties up together. So yeah, that's kind of a brief introduction about what we do. We're a Chennai-based firm, but we have projects across the country, and yeah, that's a very
Great.
short summary of
So,
yeah.
so 8 plus. So, I understand E stands for environment and D stands for, you
Design.
said? Okay, design.
Design.
So, plus is the people that you work with or the projects that you work with. Okay,
That's right.
great. Okay, so let's move on to our today's topic, which is primarily to do with climate responsive architecture. So, would you like to throw some light on probably what do you think, or let's say your views about climate responsive architecture?
Okay. So I kind of want to break away from the general textbook notion of, like, if you Google climate responsive architecture, what's going to come up? Uh, the basics of what even I learned back in architecture school was, you have the sun analysis, you have the wind analysis, etc., sun path, all of that, and how the building kind of, functions as an individual entity. Okay, so that's what your textbook definition of how climate responsive architecture is. But thinking slightly, on a different angle, right now we've come to this stance as an architectural community where we're kind of being blamed, if I were to say, for not taking climate change too seriously. And especially in the 2018 onwards, UN actually passed a report that almost 38% of the emissions that are carbon emissions that are there are from the building industry.
Mm-hmm.
So if you actually see from 2018 onwards, there has been a sudden shift of sustainable architecture coming in, climate responsive architecture, green architecture, different terminologies for the same thing. And even if you see, like I did my architecture in 2011, where sustainability was probably just a small subject in a single semester. But
Mm-hmm.
nowadays, even in architecture school, sustainability or climate responsiveness has been blown out to an entire specialization and masters itself. So all of this is because of this sudden thrust where everyone's like taken aback, like, oh, we're not doing anything, and the world is working towards climate change, and what are we doing as an industry towards that? So a result of that, what's happening is this whole sustainability aspect is looked upon as a punishment rather than as something you want to do.
Correct.
People are like, "Oh, we have to be sustainable.
Mm.
Not that we want to be or not that it has to be. If you see a lot of descriptions, and unfortunately it's a description we also put off as an architecture firm, is, oh, we are a sustainable practice. We try to be sustainable designs. And not that it's given that, okay, if you're an architecture firm, you should be, sustainable. And I will elaborate more on what I think of, sustainability as we go on. So if we ourselves are thinking about this, how are our clients going to take it? Okay. And for the clients, especially for who we are building this out, it's very, very difficult to explain to them why we need to do this, and it kind of becomes like, oh, I think you should add solar panels because, you might get a LEED certification, you might get, it's almost like, you're doing a bargain with them, you add solar panels and this thing, which is why, as you introduce this concept of hedonistic sustainability, one of like the people or architects I look up to, Bjarke Ingels, gave this TED talk in 2011. I'm not sure if you've seen that, where there's a project called Copenhagen. It's a 279 feet tall industrial building where essentially what the building is it converts trash into energy. Okay, it's a very industrial project. If it were to done in some place in our country, would be kept on the outskirts of the city. Nobody would know about it or anything like that. So what Big did was they took this project and they made a skating park on the roof of it. So essentially the project is designed as a slope and you actually slope down it. So this has been put in the center of the city and is now one of the biggest urban attractions in Copenhagen.
Mm.
It is a 100% sustainable initiative done by the government, but nobody looks at it as a sustainable project. It becomes a fun project. So coming down or summarizing down is, for me, climate responsive architecture doesn't necessarily mean how the building itself functions with the climate, but rather a third component of the user itself, how the user can interact with the building, and the two of them together interact with the climate that the building is set in. So kind of like a wholesome structure to the whole thing. Yeah.
So I'll kind of summarize and brief this in a couple of points. Wherein what Ammaar is trying to say is, when we talk about sustainability, it should not be a tag that someone wants to earn out of, doing something sustainable. It's a natural responsibility that we should be looking at something which is, I would say, naturally sustainable rather than trying to make an effort to achieve it. And so-called projects which probably go for sustainability, some of them are more for the brand name sustainability as against actually wanting to be sustainable. So I fully agree with you, Ammaar, on that. And we also come across many cases where these things do happen. And sadly enough, the market is governed by the customers and their, I would say, architectural awareness is dependent upon our sharing our sharing this knowledge with them. So that's also one of the objectives of these sessions that we do. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Next, I mean, how would you go about to tell the viewers that what are the clear factors which affect the building from the point of view of climate responsive architecture. So what are
Right.
the factors that determine it?
Okay. Okay. So I think the answer to this kind of lies twofold, where one is the building itself reacting to the context that it is set in. Having said that, you know, people say, okay, so every small drop, forms an ocean, but is actually making one building in an entire urban context climatically responsive enough? Or I feel that the higher you go up in scale of intervention, the larger the impact is. Now, to give you an example, I'm doing a perfectly climate responsive building by putting solar panels, I have rainwater harvesting, 100% net zero, and all of that. But what if there is a governance that is kind of put in? Like, this is a factor that has to be taken into consideration, where, say, all the buildings in a certain region have a certain set of, I don't want to use the word rules, but rather guidelines to follow. So, if there is excess rainwater running off from the site, can it all be collected and taken to a common reservoir that later on will service the same set of buildings that are giving this water during the summer months? The same can be spoken about in energy, in electricity. It's what I'm trying to say is it doesn't, one single building cannot really make a large scale difference. It might make a difference to that one person. But if I'm going to be sitting in one building where I'm like, oh, I don't have any air conditioning, etc., and the next plot is having a full blast of 100 tons of ACs running in, what is kind of like the whole point about it? So what I'm trying to say is a broader perspective really would make a difference. And I think where again I'm blaming architects for this, where we we have this thing like we are architects. This is an urban designer's job, not an architect's job. Beyond my compound wall, I'm not going to think of what is happening. I'm not thinking of the context beyond that. So in a lot of cases, if we actually start seeing how this a building, for it to be truly climatically responsive, can we start seeing how it goes beyond the site's boundary? And this is where I think our topic makes a lot of sense of blending in traditional and modern. Okay, how did traditional settings or how did houses actually come together? A group of community hunters became gatherers, and then they started becoming settlers. Now, in order for them to become settlers, they established the community and a set of houses were put together. So, which is why when you see traditional form of urban development, every house in a certain area is identical. Okay,
Yeah.
if you like just scroll down towards history, the buildings will have very similar plans. I'm not saying that all our buildings right now need to be the same, but the reason why they were identical is because at that particular site they all responded similarly to the climate. Hence, the result of that, what they yielded off of that, was a collective positive impact rather than an individual positive impact.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, for me, that is what climate. I would like to blur the line between architecture and urban or neighborhood planning and see how we can start looking at our neighborhoods more as climatically responsive neighborhoods than a climatically responsive building.
So probably, I mean, although I don't have too much of knowledge about architecture, but then what I get an idea of is that just like we these days have industrial parks, which are very specific to what the objective of the trade, I mean, the trade is, or let's say the park is like a food park, or let's say a cold chain park. So do you think that the government should be a part of the, I would say, architectural fraternity in actually recommending, or I would say demarcating an area where it allocates, land for building sustainable projects only, example, like an industrial park. Now, because I think considering, I mean, example, if someone wants to build a residence, obviously his first objective would be to go into the best social, I would say, prominent place he can afford a house in or a land in. And now that place may or may not have been thought of from a sustainable point of view. So what I'm trying to say is that considering an old palette which has already developed to some extent by its own ways, I mean, previous government, regulations, architecture, So going forward, do you think that demarcating a place where such activities are taken care of, because that's the only hope where you can have common facilitation for the, like you said, energy, I would say excess rainwater, etc., etc. So what are your views on that?
See, I would say not necessary because, especially in India, you cannot expect a clean slate. Okay, unless you're going to build a new city or a new town, there is no question of clean slate. We make do with what we have, and I think instead of government and architectural fraternity combining, we're kind of missing out on the people living there. I think they need to be in the center, and we guys need to kind of work around them rather than us working together and then giving them another new set of development regulations saying that here, follow.
Mm-hmm.
I think public opinions are something that are really lacking with our case. And there are, I'm not saying that there are not public opinions not being taken, but the amount of which the public is actually getting to interact and decide on what is happening in their neighborhood, because they are going to be living there. We are not
Agreed.
living there. I'm drawing it on paper and giving the thing. The government is just setting the regulations. These guys are going to be there for the rest of their lives. So their say really comes in, and the future, even after the building is built, how that entire area has to be governed. If the government comes and gives it in their hands, saying that by doing all of these, you guys are going to be the ones saving water. You guys are the ones going to be saving electricity bill. They will. Anyone is obviously going to take that plus the step forward and be involved. But the minute you say no, you guys have to do this, everyone's going to take a back step.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
just general human nature. पैसा दिखाओ तो सब लोग आएंगे सामने. So
Hmm.
that's the basic logic that we want to do. So unless the people are involved, all of this is going to look very nice on theory, but not really result
No,
into
I'm with you on
like.
that. I think you said it very well that other than the urban planners, architects, or for that matter, the government, it should be a people-driven and people-centric approach that we should be taking, because till the time all stakeholders are not on board, the possibility of success always is equivalent to those or proportionate to those who are not on board at the end of the day. So yes, they are the very important piece in the entire puzzle, and I think probably what we can do around here is spread more awareness on all these things, and maybe soon we should have some customer or community-driven projects like that. So okay,
Right.
let's move on to our next question. So how do the building materials and strategic openings decide the structure's longevity?
Right. So let's take an example. Assuming you like denim a lot and you're buying a lot of denim, you're really expensive one, storing it, and you really like the material. But you wash it in really hot water, you use harsh detergents on it, you don't dry it naturally, but rather in a dryer. Over the period of time, it's gonna shrink, it's gonna
Right.
fade, it's gonna be discolored, and your favorite pair of clothing is not the same anymore. Similarly, for our buildings, right? We need to really see on the material that we are using. Okay, we might really like the material, but how we are using it and where we are using it highly impacts it. I don't believe that there are good or bad materials. Like I've always, even in school, heard this thing like, oh, this is a bad construction material, this is a good
Hmm.
construction material. All materials are the same. It is where we utilize them and how we utilize them that impacts. Now, if I'm using metal near a sea coast, and over a period of time, the metal is going to rust and, or it's going to corrode, doesn't mean metal is a bad building material, just that we didn't use it right. So, or using like a really soft stone for an exterior or a light colored stone for the exterior facade, and that discoloring or aging over time doesn't mean that you cannot use that stone elsewhere. So, to answer your question, building materials, how they help or look at the longevity of the building, looks at how you are actually going to use it and how the implementation of the building is. If we are again coming back to the topic of climate responsive, like insulated walls and roof are considered very good. They help trap the heat, etc. Where you're creating a cavity between the slab. Now, if you're using a same insulated setting in a high humid
Yeah.
atmosphere, you are going to let condensation develop in that gap, and then you're going to get a call from the client at 3 a.m. in the night saying that, oh, the building is leaking. It is not that insulated buildings, they work very well in a very cold thing where you also need to trap the cold from coming inside, stillness from coming inside. So for me, I think building materials work perfectly. I think they are amazing. A lot of them are natural or artificial materials, but it's our implementation of it. And like I said earlier, where we place it. And building materials really work in tandem with the openings of how we are going to do. If a large opening or a window is placed in front where there is direct sunlight coming inside, over a period of time, if you're using fabric, right, the fabric is going to discolor. If you have a certain form of paint or plaster, there might be, due to expansion and contraction, cracks to develop over there. It's like how in museums you cannot have direct light actually falling on top of the paintings because that will discolor. So I don't think openings and building materials can be moved away. In fact, they really need to start working together. Many times when we design plans, we put the layout, window, locations, everything, wherever it's suitable between two columns, we just insert a window. And then we don't think when we're deciding on the material that is on the wall outside. So when I think all of this is put in together, it really highly impacts the life of the building. And to conclude, when we are placing openings, we really need to consider the wind direction and everything, which is like architecture 101 that over a period of time we've kind of lost, because we don't tend to actually calculate the wind load that is falling on top of that opening and how much of air is coming in. Is it hot air, is it cool air, what are the months in which the all of that is coming in, and the materials that are used in that consecutive room will get affected by that. So yeah, that's what I feel is.
Okay, great. Very well said, actually. Now, these are the problems that probably, even if I have to speak from the perspective of our trade, as in fenestrations, we often come across customers when we recommend them a double glass, and either by way of price or by way of the largest spans that they need, they end up choosing a toughened glass as against a double glass. And we do often get calls in winter season when they are, it's cold outside or humid outside, and you have heaters running inside. And obviously, one surface is heated up and the other surface is cold, and a condensation is bound to develop. And sometimes they feel that overnight, when condensation develop, it also, the water trickles down from the surface of the top of the window until the end, and they feel that the window is leaking. So I fully agree with you, the context that probably you put in the insulated walls. So that is definitely the case that happens. So thank you for that answer, and I think this will be pretty useful for the viewers, or let's say people who would see it afterwards. Let's move on to our next question now. This is to do with passive cooling techniques. So basically, can you tell us, observing the natural forces, the different passive cooling techniques used in traditional buildings or ancient, I may say, and the modern buildings?
Right. Instead of many, I would like to kind of focus just on one missing. I think one of a very, very good in terms of planning a technique that is used is the intervention of courtyards. I
Yes.
think it is quite it's so simple, but it's just so amazing where technically what is a courtyard? In a built mass, you're creating a void in the center.
Correct.
But that void has so many benefits. One, it gives you an additional surface to, bring in air or, provide an additional surface where air can actually exit from the building by itself. And if you see, especially in our context, no matter where in the country you go, and somewhere or other, the courtyards were always
A
there in
part
our
of it. Definitely,
advantage.
yeah.
Whether we go to the local Chettinad style housing, or if you go to Rajasthan and you're looking at the traditional, so
Yes.
there's a big courtyard, there's a small courtyard, there's a succession where every room kind of, because of this one simple open space in the center, is much cooler, and it also doubles up as an open living space traditionally.
Correct.
Nowadays, the courtyard has gone through such beautiful transformations. Like, courtyards no longer are seen only in the ground floor. Courtyards are elevated. You may have a
Yeah.
courtyard on the fourth floor of a building, right? Before, you wouldn't imagine that you might, and you can landscape this entire thing. So before, you wouldn't imagine that sitting on the fifth or sixth floor of a building, you might actually get such a beautiful green view, though there is
Correct.
not really such a similar context on the outside. or you can have a water body in the center. You could have an open living area like how it is traditionally. So I think one of the best ways, one of the best things we've kind of taken from our traditional planning techniques is the use of courtyards.
Correct.
And in our context, and talking more so in Chennai, I think every building needs at least some form of a courtyard or the other, because it really, really makes a difference to the inner functioning or the microclimate that is created inside the structure.
Yeah, and I need to add here, a lot of houses that we do in Delhi and around, they definitely have courtyard. But sadly enough, these days, what we are seeing is that the courtyards are closed from the top, and they are putting in ventilator fans just to get the I would say the heat air outside, hot air outside.
Right.
And it's happening almost in more than 50% of the projects. So I think the charm of the courtyard is only left to the light coming in, but no ventilation happening through it. As in, if you want a cool, I mean, in a way, you are creating a glass house as against the objective of the place, allowing the place to ventilate out from here and be cooler. And in a tropical
Right.
climate, I think that should be the main objective than creating a glass house, which is more of a concept in probably winter or temperate climates. So
Right.
that's one thing that I often kind of observe. But then, yes, I don't know who's pushing for it or who's kind of supporting it. It's the architect or, for that matter, the customer. But that's very often that I come across in the projects that we do.
See, actually, that's a very fair thing for a customer to ask, because security is something that every client asks us
Mm.
when we are doing proposing a courtyard. But we do have options where you can have mechanically operated
Operated
roofs for the
together.
courtyards. So it doesn't really have to be a ventilator. We have the liberty of using technology now, which they didn't before. And I think that is where the modern intervention for the same thing is coming into play.
Yes.
So I think there are solutions to this, not really something that we cannot tackle as architects. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, let's move on to our next question, which is to do with, I mean, that's from your personal experience that we need to know, or we would like to know that have you used fenestration systems that you probably can recall as a union of ancient, I would say, practice with modern technology?
Okay. Yes, in fact, we recently completed a house where the window system that we used was heavily inspired from a very traditional setting. So this was a beach house, and most of the every room opened completely towards the ocean. So what we did was, though we need to get a great view of the beach, you also need to really cut out from a lot of things. So this window system has three layers. The inner layer has a bug screen, and then you have a glass shutter, and then you have wooden lure. It's aluminum lured shutters, and the lures are actually operable between 30 degrees to 90 degrees. So
Mm.
essentially, what ends up happening is it gives the user almost six possible uh, ways in which they can use the window. Like during the daytime, when they want to open up everything, open up the bug screen, the glass, and the shutters, they get like a complete view and the air is coming in. Now, if it's getting really hot, they just want to shut the glass shutter, the louvers, and the bug repellent is over. You just get a view. Over the evening, you have this open, pull the bug screen, and you
Mm.
don't have any of your mosquitoes coming in. And finally, during the more peak sun hour times, you shut the louvers and adjust it to whatever angle. You have the breeze coming in, but you don't have the light actually coming into the
Yeah,
space.
I get
So
it.
this was, in fact, if you see, most of our traditional windows were always solid. The use of glass was very, very minimal in our traditional setting.
Mm.
You might have stained glass, but majorly they used to be solid shutters, or they used to be shutters with these kind of louvers, and they would always be on the first floor. They would never be on the ground level. Essentially, for people from the first floor to peek down into the street, because unlike now, before everybody wanted to shut off the house and not let anybody see inside. Now we've
Mm.
gone through a complete opposite where we want to make much more glazing and
Mm.
have the visibility from outside to inside. So this to us was a very interesting blend of modern and traditional setting, and I think the client is really utilizing
Correct.
every possibility and scenario. And these were not readily available aluminum systems. They had to be customized for this particular
Got
project,
it.
and I think it worked out quite well
Mhm.
in this scenario.
So in a way, probably what we're talking about is obviously these days the buildings, or let's say built floors, also try and provide a balcony to every room from the point of view. that they want more, I mean, that's where the glazing also comes in, that everyone wants to see their own world outside as against, not being able to see what's happening outside, because these days the ownership is also, I would say, floor wise as against some one person living, or let's say joint family living in the same house. Okay, I mean, let's move on to the last question. We need to quickly wind this up because we'll be overshooting the timing that probably put the interest of the people at the back foot. So this is the last question saying, how would you bolster conscious practices with a blend of vernacular and modern fenestration techniques?
Okay. I think it is kind of in my job profile to be conscious of every decision that I make, be it for fenestration or anything. But I think what would be nice is for fenestration companies like yourself and for us to kind of develop on a lot of products together, because many times when we actually scout for products for some of our projects, the examples and the photos that we are shown are in all these Scandinavian countries where you have slim lane, sleek glass, may not
Correct.
really be useful for our context or anything. And most of the times when we say, oh, can we have something like this, the answer ends up being, oh, that's going to be difficult. It has to be prototyped. It has to be manufactured and all. I feel can we come up with a system where it is more like a prototype, where you have multiple components and you can actually plug in and plug out
Like
what works
more
for them to
modular
plug in.
system.
Sorry?
Modular.
Yeah, something like modular, where you have different things. Like the lures are one example. You may need shading devices in a certain thing. You might joinery is kind of construed to be only glass, but it's not only glass. You have so many other layers that
Yeah.
somebody might want to add to that. So I think that is where I kind of see the lack, where we need to go to a third agency to give us these shading
Hmm.
devices or whatever
Yeah.
it be. I'm just giving an example of a shading device. So that I think is something can do, and definitely no matter what, everything we do is kind of an inspiration we take from a vernacular setting. Especially at this stage as architects, I think we're doing very less invention and more kind of like inspiration taken
Hmm.
from architectural things that were done earlier. So yeah, that's pretty much I think how I think people like yourself and us could contribute together to the industry.
Okay, great. So here we come to the end of our today's session. It was great being with you, and we definitely would like to invite you when so you are coming to North to Chandigarh, and we would love to visit you whenever we are visiting Chennai next. So, any last few
Definitely.
words about the topic of the day? I mean,
I mean, if there are people who are still lasting by the end of 30, I think 5 minutes now,
yeah,
I think it pretty much summarizes that. I mean, I just keep saying this as often, like, we need to start having fun with climate responsiveness, because otherwise it's really a drag of a subject that even I really skipped and bunked most of my classes back when I was in college, because it wasn't really seen as a fun thing. So just I would say have fun with everything that we're doing in this particular topic or field.
all right, great. Thank you very much. Looking
Thank you so
forward
much.
to and meet you
Yeah,
anywhere in the future. Thank
that
you.
was lovely.
Bye.
Bye bye.